All right, welcome back, scholars. So today we're going to continue on with Module 6, Nationalism versus Sectionalism Unit, and we're going to start with this concept, which was called the American system. So at the time, our president was President Madison, and he wanted to make the United States self-sufficient, so it could stand on its own, it wasn't relying upon anyone, kind of like when you turn 18, the goal is for you to be self-sufficient, you don't have to live at home anymore, you could go out and get a job and support yourself. So we wanted to be able to support ourselves. So this was a three-part system. The first part was he was going to put a protective tariff. A tariff is just a tax on imported goods, and it was going to make American products easier to buy. So the concept was you could buy a $5 teapot in the United States, or you could buy a teapot from overseas, but they were going to charge a very high tax on that teapot. So either way, they were going to keep your money in the United States. Either they were going to keep that $5 teapot money from buying inside the United States, or they were going to tax you on the across the seas teapot, and they were going to keep that money as well. So the idea is to keep money in the United States, to earn money, to keep money, to increase the revenue for the United States. The second thing it did was establish a national bank. So kind of like today how we have a ton of Arvest or Southwest Missouri Bank or American Bank or wherever your parents bank, right? We had a national bank, so literally one big bank. Also, they were going to have one type of currency. So I know it seems odd back then. They had like Virginia money and Maryland money and Massachusetts money and New York money and Delaware money. Every state had its own money and it wasn't equal. So maybe your New York dollar was only worth 70 cents if you tried to take it down to Virginia. And so what they wanted to do is have a one money that went for all the states, which is what we have today, right? Your dollar is $1 in Missouri, $1 in Oklahoma, $1 in Hawaii, $1 in California. $1 is $1 within the 50 United States. But back then, at this point, we're talking about pre-Civil War, that wasn't the case. And so they were really trying to nail down and have a one. They thought that would unite the country. That theme of nationalism, that I love you, you love me, we're a happy U.S. family, that idea of nationalism was going to be helped by having one currency that was all equal between all the states. Another way, the third way, to promote this American system to try to improve nationalism is actually to improve the country's roads and canals and bridges and railway lines, right? To actually connect people and goods easier in the United States. Now, I know we don't have canals today. We'll talk about those in a minute. The road that they put in, the very first thing, like highway, kind of like how you have I-44 or Route 66. Well, the very first one was called National Road, right? It went all the way from Maryland to Illinois. And it's the first time that you could stay on the same road. You didn't have to get off and get on another one to go place to place. Now, granted, we're still talking kind of about horse and wagons back then, but it still was an established road. Canals. So let's talk about canals. We don't really have those in Missouri. If you go across the state to Illinois, they actually do have a couple of canals. Probably our most famous canal in the United States is the Erie Canal. Obviously, the most famous canal in the world probably is the Panama Canal, but a canal is man-made. So it's almost like a man-made river, except for it doesn't flow like a river. It has a series of locks. Almost think of it like very large bathtubs that fill up and down in order to move boats across it through the different water levels, because it doesn't flow like a natural river. So this canal, the Erie Canal, went across the whole state of New York. And actually, if you were to take rivers, you could connect to the Atlantic Ocean. So literally, you could go from the Atlantic Ocean, take some rivers over, hit the rivers in New York, as you can see there on the side by Albany, and then get it across all the way to Lake Erie. So you could transfer people and goods through waterways like that, which was pretty phenomenal at the time. Now, what I'm going to do below, like I did last week, is I'm going to link this video. It's from the history series called The Story of Us, and it's the building of the Erie Canal, and it's pretty neat. I'll also link for you this video, people today still take their boats in and out of the Erie Canal, and it shows you how the lock system works. So under this video, this lecture video, I will post the links for those two videos so that you can kind of see how the Erie Canal and the lock system works, especially because we don't have those in Missouri and we're not used to them. So this is kind of the wrap up for if we had a textbook, it would be the first section of the unit and things to think about, deep thoughts that might appear on the test. So things to look at. So here are the questions. So at this point, if you want to pause the video and answer these questions in your mind or in your notes, make sure that you kind of have an idea about what they would be. So in class the other day, so what I do is I actually teach it in class to kind of work out the bugs. So we did this lesson on Thursday. Today is Sunday when I'm recording this. And so they got stuck on question 2, how the northern mill system and the southern plantation system were economically similar, or how they were just similar in general. We spend so much time like talking about how they're different. They really had a hard time trying to find out how they were similar. And so when you're thinking about number 2, think about the numbers of people it takes to work both of those systems, the amount of money that's brought in through both of those systems, the type of people. When we talk about vocabulary terms like unskilled labor that work in both of those systems, and also the dependence one on the other. If they're growing cotton in one, but they're utilizing the cotton in the other, there's that relationship between the two, the dependency between the two. So they're not as dissimilar as it would first appear. There actually is quite a few things that are the same between the two. So just food for thought. So at this point, I would kind of pause, look through those, and then start the video back up, and we're going to talk about steamboats. Okay, so hopefully you unpaused and now you're ready to talk about steamboats, our next invention. So we give credit to this guy, Robert Fulton, and this is not the best photograph of Fulton. Well, it's not a photograph, but a sketch, an etch, right? So technically he didn't invent the steam engine and he didn't invent the boat. He just figured out how to put a steam engine on a boat. And so that's what he gets credit for. And this is going to speed up transportation. Before, you were really reliant on a river's current. You could not go against the current because you're really like paddling or sailing, and that isn't very good. So you could go down river very quickly, but there was no real good way to get back up river, right? And so he figures out how to do that. So once again, below this section, I will also have one on how steam engines work, and maybe that'll explain to you how he was able to fit one on a boat. His first boat was this one called the Clermont. We don't have any real photos, we just have sketches of the Clermont. The problem with steam engines is if you think about when your mom cans something, or even a tea kettle, if you don't release that pressure, think about what might happen to those engines if you're not watching it carefully. And if you're a thinking person, you're like, oh, they probably go kaboom a lot. And you're right. They do go kaboom a lot. They explode. And so the amount of explosions, decimated ships, people that die on board steamboats is pretty high back then when they're first made. But the issue is that they are so quick and so powerful that people are willing to risk it. I mean, it's no different really than car crashes today. There's car crashes every day across the state of Missouri, but we still get in automobiles, right? It's just that kind of assumption of the risk. So you will have several videos over the steamboat. This is one. This is another. This one's interesting because it actually links what's happening with Abraham Lincoln during this time period. Remember, we're still quite a few years before the Civil War, and at this he is an older teenager, and you find out what his job is, and he actually has a run-in. If you see here in the background, he has almost a literal run-in with a steam engine whenever he's a teenager. So it's kind of interesting, and I will link those below as well. If you go up by Kansas City, they have the Steamboat Arabia Museum, and it is one of the steamboats that we're talking about. It was loaded down, think of like a packed semi-truck, on its way to deliver to all these stores along the river. A tree branch catches it in the side, rips a huge hole in it, and it sinks. It goes straight down. Well, the river is so deep and so wide that it just sits there. Everyone was able to get off board. They weren't able to get the supplies off, so it'd be like a fully packed semi-truck going to Walmart, just sinking. Um, and it just sits there for over 150-ish years. And then a couple of brothers up by Kansas City, kind of amateur treasure hunters, thought that they had figured out where the steamboat sank. And they decided, if you've ever seen like the old movies like Titanic, where they go down and they look for the buried treasure on the Titanic, that sort of thing. They thought if they could bring it up, they would have all these things that were pre-Civil War, that they could open a museum, or they could sell them, or they could make a movie about it, something, right? Well, when they tracked down where it sank, it's actually now a farmer's field. So 150 years of the riverbed, like eroding, the sediment, everything else built up. Now it's actually, the river has been diverted enough that that is actually the edge of a farmer's field. So they have to convince the farmer to dig on his land. And he was convinced. They convinced him. So if you look up here at the very top where my little cursor is, that's where his farmland was. That's where he's growing crops. So you can see how far down they had to dig. This is the boat here. This is the boilers of the engine, the steam engine over here. You can see how far down the boat was, and the water used to go on top of it. So they were able to find all the goods on board. They had to clean them up. They have to do restoration work. But if you go to the museum in Kansas City, you can just see it's not one or two plates on board. There were hundreds of plates, because remember, it was loaded down for stores. And so they have all of it on display. They had clothes, they had weapons, they had saws. Here's like the hundreds of pairs of boots and hats that it had on board. The only casualty was the mule, and it had been tied up on board, and they weren't able to rescue it, and they found the mule bones. And it also had food. And so they actually did break open one of these bottles of pickles and ate them over 160 years later. They said they still tasted like sweet pickles. So canning food, that lasts for a very long time. So hopefully in this section we covered the American system and we covered steamboats. So as you complete these notes at the end of the week, I'm going to ask you to upload them again as we get closer to the end of the unit and an exam. So thanks for listening, and look for the other videos.